Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Committee of the Whole work session, supporting community through quality public service. Today, our meeting is starting at 10:30, today on October 15th. And we have a couple of guests with us this morning. We have Kyle Stover and Tom Hall, both from the U.S. Forest Service. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
All right, good morning. We're looking forward to having some updates from the Superior National Forest, and so we'll turn the program over to you.
Awesome. So I have sort of an intent of doing this at least on a yearly basis, and it's only taken me 2 years to actually get it booked and on the schedule, and so we're doing good. But the idea is just to come and check in, right? There are lots of things that occur on the Superior National Forest that occur within Cook County. I've done this already with Lake County, and we're still working on St. Louis County, but I've been before their board a couple different times on other topics as well. But, you know, the business that is the Forest Service and how that interacts within your county and the constituents that come from the Forest Service, all of those sorts of things that we're trying to do on National Forest System lands, knowing how much of the forest occurs in Cook County, obviously is significant. So I have 4 topics. We'll see if I can get through this in the time allotted, but hopefully it's meaningful for us to talk through. So the first one is emergency response. And so obviously this year, and we're sort of coming maybe out of our fire season, a little bit hard to see. We're still in fire restrictions, not knowing what kind of moisture we got and how that affected the fire indices, that risk. They're having a conversation this morning at the task force within the MNICS organization. So that's the state, the Forest Service, other federal entities, and local entities of what that fire risk looks like, what that severity looks like. Obviously, our bimodal fire season, we normally have one early spring and we normally have one fall. Our fall has gone a little bit longer than typical, and at least last week we were in record-setting indices for fire risk, and so that's why we went into fire restrictions in coordination with the state and the boundary waters a little bit prior to that, because we were seeing a lot of human-caused fires, and you know that impacts everybody, and we wanted to prevent that. Nationwide, we've been providing and supporting nationwide fire response really all summer, and so a rather large fire season with our fire resources and really non-fire resources also supporting what we think of as planning level 4 and 5, and so that drawdown of resources, and we'll talk a little bit about our staffing issues within the Forest Service, that impacts us nationwide, and so it's just that drain on resources has just been heightened, and so we've been bouncing between 4 and 5 being the highest level nationwide for the last few months, and so as we have seasonal employees that are going back to school or being laid off and all those sorts of things, that drain on resources has continued to hit us as an agency. Obviously, the June 18th storm event, that actually impacted more of other counties than it did Cook County, but there were impacts here. You know, we had temporary road closures, mostly inaccessible areas in Cook County from the June 18th storm damage, but as you sort of transition through the North Shore, obviously the Tofty district was hit harder than the Gunflint district, and then as you sort of go into the center of the forest, that's where we had the biggest amount of damage. And I think we're down to 7 roads that are still closed from that, and most likely will continue to be closed until we're able to get that long-term repair money from federal highways. And so that's maybe 2026. Unfortunately, the wheels of government move slow when it comes to big funding amounts. Obviously, we've had other types of impacts, including the grade being closed. That was a construction issue that impacted that closure. But we're kind of approaching those closures in a similar way. We're trying to be very transparent, trying to be early in the information that we know, and then share that information in multiple modes as much as we're able to. And then the last thing sort of with emergency response, search and rescues, somewhat of an average year with search and rescues across the boundary waters and really outside of the boundary waters as well. That interaction that we have with the county sheriffs, because that's the jurisdiction, it's their responsibility. We try to support that both with our resources, especially the beaver when that's appropriate. But within the boundary waters, we still have wilderness restrictions. And so motorized use, that coordination is really key. We recognize it's an emergency, it's their jurisdiction. And so, where appropriate, and in most cases, we're trying to find that solution, and we'll authorize what they're asking for, but we just ask that they try to understand that, it's a non-motorized area, and if they can access that, support that emergency response for search and rescue. Again, continuing to work on those relationships and make sure that everybody understands where we're at. I really do feel both in Cook County and the other counties, we're in a really good spot. Those relationships have been improved. The general populace that goes into the boundary waters, there's kind of, especially during the pandemic and after the pandemic, there's not a lot of people that are understanding the situation that they're getting into and their ability to take care of themselves or self-extract. And so we've had more false alarms, and the county sheriffs have validated that for us, that that's a drain on their resources as much as ours. Definitely not a situation that we want to be in. And so trying to improve that education for the general populace, and find solutions to make sure that we're able to do what is need to be done at the time. Any questions with emergency response?
Go ahead, Commissioner Johnson.
When you're talking about education, and I'm wondering if you're working with our local Visit Cook County on that.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Yeah, we actually have agreements, and obviously, I'll jump ahead. Kyle Stover is our new district ranger out of the Gunflint Ranger District. Not really new to the forest, but, developing and strengthening those relationships as well. And so when we're thinking of the Gunflint Trail, when we're thinking of just in general the boundary waters, all of those are relationships that we're trying to strengthen to improve that education. Whether that's our front desk or our wilderness rangers, our social media, our press releases, all of the permit issuance, whether it's through cooperators or through ourselves, all of those are opportunities for us to engage and try to improve understanding and education. And so trying to exercise that as much as possible. This last year, we actually entered into an agreement with the Ely Tourism Bureau, and we did a podcast, and we did all sorts of educational opportunities through that. And so we could definitely explore other opportunities in the future with Visit Cook County.
And WTIP now, when you're talking podcasts, they have other podcasts.
They do, absolutely.
So that would be another
Yeah.
avenue to get that word out there.
For sure.
A lot of people that visit listen to WTIP.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Probably more than live here. And I
For
want to
sure.
ask about the grade.
Yeah,
It's critical.
it is. We recognize
So is
it.
it an engineering issue with the bridge, or is it an environmental issue with the bridge? And isn't there emergency funding available? We can make that happen sooner than what you're
So
predicting?
that's a little bit different timeline than the federal highways money. That is an engineering issue, and so we had to go back into that engineering design to make sure that it's long enough, because they actually ran into stability issues with the first design, and so it just takes time to actually be able to go and put that bridge in place with the new design, and so
I know
all of
about
that.
Okay.
So that was an unintended outcome for sure.
Because I mean, that's pretty serious.
We recognize that.
I've had 2 people call me say, there's not enough signage. Now, I did drive up one end and like, oh, how says it on this end? But
Yeah.
I don't know about the other end.
So we've had issues with people not understanding what that is, and so we did put a closure in, and we put barriers and all of those other types of things, recognizing that what people see and what they understand, maybe that needs to be over-exaggerated sometimes.
Yeah, this is just heads up on that.
Yeah, appreciate
I
it.
got phone calls.
Yeah, no, and we recognize that, and that's not a place that we want to put you in. Again,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
say it's your problem.
we are trying to fix that as quickly as possible, but unfortunately, that's going to be the spring, early summer before the ground thaws enough to actually put that back in place.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the next thing is integrated vegetation management. And so thinking timber sales or prescribed fires. So overall, you know, the Tofty landscape project, part of that comes up into Cook County. We're in the cycle 2 now. And so continuing to implement that, continuing to have timber sales that occur both in Cook and Lake County from that project. There are multiple different projects that have been signed on the Gunflint Ranger District as well, whether that's the Blue Cascade project or even going back to Kimball or how many others.
There's several. Shokoshu in the Mid-Trail area, or Twin Green is another project along the Gunflint Trail and areas.
So overall planning is not a restriction on this forest. We're in a really good spot with the amount of authorization that we have. It really comes down to the contractors available to us, whether that's timber industry, it's a marketable product, or fuels reduction projects. And so those are limitations, as you all experience, trying to get people up here from that business environment. Obviously, having the mill here is hugely helpful in that market for products to go to, but there's only so much that they can take and a certain product that they're looking for. And obviously the spruce budworm issues that we've been having, you know, that starts to overwhelm the system if that's all that we're offering. And so we're very mindful of that. But as that has continued to move to the east, you know, that's an impact that we're trying to mitigate, both from a fire risk standpoint and what are we capable of doing out on that landscape. It is a natural cycle, spruce budworm. The next cycle that follows spruce budworm is tent caterpillars. And so, like, unfortunately, this will continue to be an issue that we're going to manage in perpetuity, right? This is a fire-adapted or a disturbance-adapted ecosystem. If you don't have fires on a consistent basis, other disturbances take that place. And so, you know, recognizing that that's part of our management on that landscape, trying to mitigate that as much as possible, trying to both reduce that risk and to realize those economic opportunities are the balance that we're trying to shoot for, both in Cook County and across the forest.
Commissioner.
Do you know offhand what the frequency of the tent caterpillar cycle is? I don't need a year necessarily, but I remember when I was a kid, I grew up in Grand Rapids, driving to Duluth to watch my aunt run Grand Rapids Marathon, and the road being unsafe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it was just so slick
Yes.
with bugs.
And I didn't know if that was the last time or if it was just a big time.
So I think the last time that we had spruce budworm was in the 60s. That was the really big.
60s, and then again, we had a large event in the 80s as well, and then forest tent in the 90s.
Mhm.
Yep.
And that's,
And there's an alteration there between, you know, forest tent, you know, affects hardwoods and deciduous trees, and then budworms affects conifer trees, and yeah, there's a relationship there.
Interesting. Huh.
So, love having a civiculturist
Yeah.
in our district ranger position.
And then, of course, I think the last time we spoke together, I was asking about biochar and if there was any movement or development around that.
Yeah.
There's talk nationally about it in the Forest Service, but I didn't know locally if there was stuff going on. I think
So from an economic development standpoint, you know, there's always conversations being had. Actually, we are working really closely right now with the research community, both our Forest Products Laboratory and the Northern Research Station, both within the Forest Service, on 2 research proposals that are funded by infrastructure money. And so one of those is using biochar, so taking fuels reduction work happening on the Superior National Forest, converting that into biochar, and then converting that into like insulation and other types of high-end products. So that's something that's already been developed. The other science, different conversation. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
The other conversation that we're having with research is that life cycle analysis, and using biochar to potentially go into coal ash remediation. And so that's one path that they're looking of how do you use biochar for that stabilization of unstable situations. whether that's mining or coal ash or any number of opportunities for that biochar. But we're also looking with research as part of that, of what is that life cycle, what is that carbon analysis of that whole cycle of, you go out and identify, here's the need, through the implementation, through the conversion to biochar, into the remediation, right? What is that whole carbon cycle? And that helping in that overall economic analysis of, is it worth it or not? So we're kind of excited about that. If that does develop into another market for us, that is just more places that the work that needs to occur out on the landscape can go.
And then also just, how, is the Forest Service involved in soil health at all?
Yeah.
Probably forest soil health.
Yeah.
And just, I'm a little bit familiar with biochar and the impacts on soil health, and so just putting it out there. But I was just curious, with climate change and timber sales, just what's anticipated for the future and how things will be changing, if there's any, I guess it wouldn't be fun, but interesting dynamics going on with these sales and replantings and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
We're shifting.
So we actually have an assisted migration plan. Kyle actually helped to write that and has helped to implement it as we continue to move forward. Lots of conversations that we've had with the tribes and in the timber industry, and all of those balance of how much do we undertake and what does that look like. And so there's multiple levels of assisted migration, and wanting to keep these landscapes forested is really our intent, right? And not introduce exotic species into the system. That's really, what are those species that already exist on the landscape? How do we take genetic stock from maybe warmer climates, those same species, and introduce them because they're better adapted? How do we take species that are maybe at the edge of these landscapes and maybe introduce them as they continue to progress north? And then really that's the limit of how far we would go with assisted migration. So those are definitely things that we're thinking about. Warmer climates, warmer winters especially, what that looks like for disturbance regimes. Potentially we're at the southern range of the boreal forest, and so everything shifts north, and so this becomes more of a pine, oak, savanna sort of landscape as you sort of think of that moving north. That's what's to the south of us, and so maybe that's what this develops into. All of that is a little bit unknown, but how do we keep this as a forested landscape? How do we preserve what we can? Those are some of the intent that we have. But there's not much that we can do to prevent the change from occurring.
And so we're not planting red oak yet, or we, as far as replantings are concerned?
So we have, our assisted migration plan is focused on, it's more of a toolkit for our planning process. It's not necessarily a proposal, but it's collecting the best science available, our set of checklists, and how we go about consulting with the tribes, and also working with our partners in public scoping to tailor how we plant. A lot of it is focused on native species that are just bringing that genetic stock further north. But oaks it's an interesting issue on the shore, just because it's got interactions with both deer and moose habitat. So that's been some concerns brought forward. So we approach that one with some degree of caution of when we enter those projects, make sure we're asking the right questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that is actually on our website, our assisted migration plan, so you can look into that more. And again, that's kind of a overall strategy that each of our projects can sort of tier under. And then there's a public engagement process, comment process as we do each of those projects. So, if there's concerns, we're trying to delve into that, including tribal consultation, public engagement, all those sorts of things. Other things related to integrated veg management, the collaborative wildfire risk reduction program. So we submitted 5 projects, one for the Gunflint District, one for the Tofty, one for Cowisway and LaCroix. and then one for the moose habitat restoration as well, which is in alignment with the Moose Habitat Collaborative, which includes the tribes and the state, and the work that we've been doing with the state under the America the Beautiful grant. Unfortunately, we only received 2. So fortunately, we received 2, both at $5 million. Unfortunately for Cook County, those occurred in the Cowishiway and LaCroix Ranger districts. So great work that we're going to be able to do for risk reduction in those areas. But those other 3 proposals that we developed are honestly still things that we're going to continue to pursue for funding opportunities into the future. And especially the moose habitat restoration work. So the work that the state has been doing, the opportunities for funding, both within state funding and federal funding, we think will continue to compete well for that. And that includes work both within the Gunflint Ranger District and the Tofty District. Other types of opportunities, whether that includes the Tofty Landscape Project or the projects that occur on the Gunflint Ranger District, again, we'll start to package those into other funding opportunities into the future. So there's still lots of needed work out on the landscape. We recognize that. Funding is the limitation. And if we can find a commercial opportunity for that to go, it can pay itself out of the woods. That's the ideal. Do you have a question?
I just had a question about staffing and how staffing plays into all of this.
Yeah, so let's move to staffing. So overall, the Forest Service has implemented an external hiring freeze. So we're not bringing new people from outside the agency into the agency except for our firefighting organization. And so recognizing that health and safety need that we have, law enforcement also exists that we're bringing in outside people. So law enforcement and firefighting.
Sorry, so fuels reduction does not fall within firefighting? Or?
So
'Cause I'm
part
thinking, like,
part of
banding
part of the organization, those skill sets
Sure.
are within that, and it really comes down to we have budget line items in our appropriations, and included within that is our salary and expense. And so how much do we have the opportunity? So there's kind of primary fire, those that are suppression, those are absolutely moving forward. The prevention, thinking of that risk reduction, those fuels organization, there's a little bit more of a question of, how much do we have money in the system to do those sorts of things. So because of the budget issues that we have as an agency, we're not hiring from outside the agency except for those health and safety sort of roles. That impacts especially our entry-level positions across the board. So you think of our front desk, you think of our wilderness rangers, or our recreation people, our timber or silviculture or fuels or any of those, right? That most of our people come from the local community or from colleges, from outside the agency to do work within the Forest Service. And those people put together, when you're thinking integrated veg management, those people put together the contracts and the packages, go out and do the field work so that we can offer up sales or put together contracts for risk reduction or agreements or those sorts of things. And so we'll have limitations in what we're capable of doing. And then, since we have sort of these buckets of money from Congress, right, some of that is for salary and some of that is for project work. Those are also going to be limited. So I don't have alternatives of here's money that I can put into a contract to do that instead. So our capacity as a forest is limited right now, which is kind of interesting given that we came from this era of plenty, right? You think of the infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, like we had a bunch of money in the system, and now we're coming out of that, and because of the appropriations that are expected or potential, we are down to, hey, we actually can't pay for all of the things in our system. And so those are the decisions that have been made at the national level, right? This is not a Superior National Forest issue. This is not an Eastern Region issue. This is a Forest Service issue. And so we are just reflecting that across the agency. So for us, we've already seen this summer impacts to our front desk staffing. We had to change office hours for both here in Grand Marais and in Tofty. We had to change that in Cook. We will see that. We've transitioned into our winter hours, not as big of an impact, but as we go into this next summer, we're gonna see that again. There's limitations of what we're gonna be capable of doing. And so we're gonna have to triage our front desk staffing. First, it will be Ely, because that's our heaviest use. Then it will be Grand Marais, that's our second heaviest use. And then beyond that, there will be limited hours, if not closures, in some of our offices of how we're staffing the front desk. That's also, how do we go and clean rec sites? How do we make sure that we're doing the right thing out in the boundary waters with digging latrines and cleaning portages and any of those other sorts of services? And so how do we meet those critical needs, knowing that we don't want to close the boundary waters? So how do we triage those other programs to make sure that we're capable of providing those services? And so that's really the mode that we're in right now. And there's trade-offs, right? If somebody's shifting from one thing into another, I'm less capable of doing that in another place. So we're squeezing a balloon, right? We'll do this thing over here and this goes away, right?
So education impacted as well.
Yeah. So the current staff that we actually have, as big as we've ever had on this forest, one of the largest public affairs shops that we have. And so I don't know if you've noticed it, but a lot more engagement both in social media, engaging with traditional media, just trying to be engaged in the local communities. So that's really important. We want to continue that where we're capable of that, but a lot of that is our front desk, right? How we interact on a day-to-day basis. And so where we're capable of doing that, still offering that high level of service, but recognizing that's not going to occur in all the places that we've done previously. That is going to shift a larger burden onto our cooperators, those businesses that have a cooperating agreement with us to offer permits. If Tofty is not available, if Grand Marais is the priority, it'll be open. Tofty maybe not as much. That shifts that burden onto those other cooperators to help us to accomplish that permit issuance for the boundary waters.
My limited time at the Forest Service showed that different cooperators had different levels of education, providing different levels of education.
Yeah. So we're gonna work on that as well. So because of the permit fees that we get from the boundary waters, there's a different money system of, you know, how we could potentially enter into a contract to clear portages and dig latrines, right? Maybe even staff our front desk, because there's a direct tie, especially during the permit quota season, of the people coming in and interacting with us, helping to staff our front desk. But also doing that audit on those cooperators of the service that they should also be providing. And so we're exploring those opportunities as well.
It has improved.
Good, yeah.
That's great.
And it's very appreciated.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This year especially.
I think the other notable thing is obviously we now have a permanent district ranger in Grand Marais for the Gunflint Ranger District, which we are ecstatic about. And Kyle, you've been in place a month and a half, two?
Was it August 12th was official day.
Yeah. So.
You have housing, you're not living in the office?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
So he's been with us for a while. So thankfully, hiring internal was a really good play because it wasn't somebody trying to come in and find a place to live.
It's got the knowledge, it's got the local knowledge, experience, and
Do you want to introduce yourself, a little bit of your background?
Sure. So, well, I've briefly introduced myself here, but my name is Kyle Stover. I've actually been a Cook County resident. It'll be 14 years in March. So, and I've worked in Grand Portage as a tribal employee. That's how I came here and came over to the Forest Service in 2015. So I've worked in Grand Marais, Tofty, and had a lot of involvement in Isabella as well. So I have a pretty good lay of the land. I already have some background knowledge of a lot of county issues. But that being said, I don't want to make that assumptions either. So I think part of what I want to do coming in this job is come in and how do we keep those lines of communication open? How do we have those conversations? How do we continue to work together? One of the things we've been doing with our public affairs shop, we tried to implement this like on the grade closure, for instance, when we elevated that to a forest closure. How do we integrate with our partners, especially at the county? So we reached out to visit Cook County with Linda, as well as as Robbie with the highway department, Mike Keyport, and we're trying to get ahead of some of those things as they come out, so they're not coming as surprises to you, but also how that facilitates the communications going into the future. So, but that's just one example. I mean, I'm here and I'm going to make myself available and engage in a lot of different county groups, you know, with if it's emergency response or the Gunflint Trail Scenic Byway or different areas of the county. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So.
We'll be sending lots of invitations your way.
Yeah, I've been getting plenty so far.
Awesome. And when is the open house that we're going to have for the district?
That is November 13th. Yeah, coming up. It'll be 4 to 7 p.m. at the Gunflint Ranger District. And yeah, we're trying to have these open houses that are not necessarily tied to any project. It's more just to come on and get to interact with a bunch of our staff, ask questions about wildlife, timber, fuels reduction, or wilderness. And certainly I will be available there. And yeah, I'd like to have those conversations.
I went to the last one and it was cookies.
Yeah.
There. It's a sure bet.
No bars?
Maybe.
Awesome. Any questions on staffing?
I think that's very helpful just to lay it out, so
Yeah.
not only for us, but for the public. It's
Yeah,
hopefully-
absolutely. So the last thing that I have on my list is the Boundary Waters. So we've stood up the Boundary Waters Collaborative. We actually met for our second in-person meeting last week over in Ely. Hopefully our next in-person will be here in Grand Marais. But that's a broad range of stakeholders from across multiple different perspectives, trying to understand what our management actions, what those effects are out on the landscape, potentially develop better education, develop better communication, and if possible, collaborative initiatives, and having that broad range of stakeholders that help us develop proposals is kind of the ultimate intent if we can get there. But if nothing else, that improved communication and education is a benefit for me to engage, and then our district rangers and staff to also engage as we have those opportunities. So we've had multiple different virtual opportunities to engage with that collaborative over the summer. We've stood up 3 work groups, one related to visitor management with a subgroup focused on reservations and permits. Another one focused on fire management, so whether that's suppression or prescribed fire, and looking at all of those different aspects. And then the third one being air quality, water quality, invasive species, and climate change. And so those are not driven by the Forest Service as topics that we specifically wanted. We engage with all of those, but it's really that broad range of stakeholders of what they want to focus on and how we can improve in our engagement in all of those different things. So that's one positive thing. We've been moving forward on the forest plan amendment related to the boundary waters. We did that public engagement process earlier this spring. We're continuing to move forward on that. We've entered into an agreement with the University of Montana, and they're going to do surveys of those permit holders from this last year to understand how they planned there and actually traveled in the boundary waters to update what we call our travel model. That'll then help us to develop our proposed action. So we're thinking sometime in mid-2025, we'll come out with a proposed action of that framework for our forest plan and an update related to the boundary waters. And there's a whole range of alternatives that we'll analyze, but this will be our first best shot at what we would propose to change within our forest plan. And really what I want to do is look at those foundational assumptions that we have of, okay, we have entry points and we have designated campsites and we have a statutory cap, right? There's law, 1978 Act that said this is how much use can occur out there, including motorized use and other types of use, what that impact is on wilderness character. So those authorities, those law, regulation, and policy that we function under, what are those range of alternatives that we analyze and what that looks like into the future, knowing that, use has changed and climate change is potential changes on that landscape. How do we want that to move forward into the future? And obviously those have impacts on local economies, and they have impacts on how people engage with the boundary waters, and so analyzing what those impacts might look like if we do make changes. And so hopefully we can be engaged with the county and all of the different organizations in Cook County as we continue to move that forward as well. And then the last thing that I have is the school trust acquisition. And so there's sort of three aspects to that project that we recently scoped. School trust being the largest, the 80,000 acres of school trust lands within the boundary waters. There's also the conservation fund lands that they were a part of the previous iteration. There's 17,000 acres within St. Louis County that they acquired that were going to be a part of exchange and purchase alternative, that 1/3, 2/3 that we've moved away from. And then St. Louis County is also interested in the tax forfeited lands within the boundary waters. And so we proposed a project that included all of those. Obviously, the impact for Cook County is those school trust lands and those 80,000 acres that occurred within the boundary waters. I don't know the number of acres that occur within Cook County. But the proposal that we've moved towards is a direct purchase. Obviously, we've closed that comment period. We received over 1,400 comments that really span the gamut, right? Positive, negative, and we're still evaluating what that looks like. A lot of that is determined on the state's authority and those politics within the state of how they want to approach this process. And then some of those are our authority to do a direct purchase as well. And so we're evaluating what all of that means. Dependent on how that sort of plays out both for the state and what we determine for our authority, we would potentially still move forward with that purchase of school trust lands sometime in 2025. The state has to take legal action to condemn those lands to then offer those for sale. We could not make a decision on that until they do make an offer of sale to the Forest Service. And so there's a lot of things that still need to occur before that's even a possibility. But definitely something that we're still focused on and still potentially moving towards. Any questions?
I'm curious about how you determine the value of the 80,000 acres in the boundary waters.
Yeah, so they've actually already done a previous appraisal of that, and they look at large land tracts as comparable appraisals, right? And so there's professional appraisers that we contract with that do that valuation for us. We have certain criteria that they have to meet for our federal acquisition process, but beyond that, it's the normal appraisal process through the open market that we tap into. So they're working through that right now.
Okay. Well, I was just curious because you think about timber value, you think about
Sure.
mining value, you think about the value of lakeshore.
Sure.
That is the one that pops into my mind right away. And so
Yeah.
just making sure.
And the complicating factor
considerations.
of wilderness, right?
Yes.
And how does that impact those valuations? Not my bailiwick, but definitely deferring to those professionals.
Okay, thank you. Other questions commissioners have?
Yeah, so how might the sale impact the county then?
So overall, once we move, if we do acquire these lands, those would sort of fall into that bucket of payment in lieu of taxes, right? And, as that occurs for the Ty Blatnick appraisal, when that occurs in 2028, the timing of this, there would most likely be some sort of payment in lieu of taxes under secure rural schools or another form of PILT payments that would occur prior. So if this occurred in 2025, 2026, if we acquired it by then, all the realty actions, there would be that sort of PILT payment is how I understand it, until 2028 when that new appraisal for Ty Blatnick would occur. And then those would be included, this is how I understand it, in those Ty Blatnick appraisals as that moves forward into the future.
Okay.
Beyond that, We would manage that as wilderness. It would not be official wilderness until Congress takes some sort of action, but under our forest plan, it's already, as soon as we were to acquire it, it would fall under our forest plan designations. If we went through the forest planning exercise, we might say these are proposed wilderness, and that would give it another layer of, hey, we're going to manage this as wilderness, but until Congress takes action, it's not official wilderness.
Any other questions or comments for either Tom or Kyle?
Well, I had another one, but I got distracted, so.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you coming and informing us and the public as well.
Yeah, hopefully this was helpful, and
Very.
hopefully doing this on a reoccurring basis would also be helpful.
Yeah, just,
We will make sure to do that.
yeah, it's extremely helpful. I'm really lucky to have representation here meeting with us, so thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, thanks so much. We appreciate you coming today.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
have a great day.
All right, thank you. All right, well, we will get ready to move on to item C, which is our Highway Department policy presentations. I see we have a couple members of our Highway Department here to help inform us as we're looking at these policies. These are some small changes, but sometimes small is mighty.
Yes.
And so we're very appreciative that you could be with us today to talk about those anticipated changes.
Hello. Thank you.
Hey.
Here we go. Yeah, so we've been working on, as Commissioner Johnson and Commissioner White can attest to, in our highway committee meetings, bright and early Thursday mornings, lots of policy discussions lately, so maybe not the most riveting things to start your Thursday morning with, but hey, we've got to do it. So these three in particular are kind of where we'd like to start. There'll be more coming down the pipeline as we get to them. But I guess we'll kind of just starting top to bottom. So our subordinate district policy, as you're aware, that's been in existence now, I believe, for 4 years, 5 years, somewhere in there. And this one, you know, we have a number of subordinate districts in the county. I believe, was it 9?
Yeah, it's always evolving.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Yep.
But it is a more recent, you know, as long as this policy is new, subordinate districts are not. So we've had some of these districts have been around for decades.
Mm-hmm.
Some are brand new. And so there've been more recently, as you know, people move up here, and we get more and more questions about it. More of them are occurring, and so questions were coming up more and more about, you know, we'll get into it, roles of the roadway representative. What is our actual involvement with those? What is the constituents of that district's involvement? So I'm not going to go through and read this line for line. It sounds terrible. But what we did is really what I took out of it was if there were questions that we came out of our highway committee with, that's what I wanted to bring here. And that was kind of part of the bigger discussion. And so I guess just kind of starting right under purpose, the first paragraph, something we talked about a lot was, you know, some of these districts are on Forest Service and DNR roads.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to put it into policy that we should work with them on getting material? Because then that's a whole other avenue where, you know, the Forest Service or the DNR doesn't have to provide material, say, to put down on a road. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But it just came up in discussions of, do we want to have that in policy as we need to do that, talk to them? Or is it just like, good practice for us to do? And so that was kind of question one that came out. I don't know if we want to discuss as we go along, or?
Sure.
That's not fine? Yeah, okay. What do you guys think?
What happens now, and what is the current situation?
Well, right now, so we, you know, a district, say you lived on a road that didn't get, you know, plowed and graded and gravelled by us, but you were part of this district, what would happen is your group, your subordinate district would determine, do you want winter services, summer services, both, and what does that look like? And so say that looked like putting down a certain amount of gravel every single year. So what that would be then is that goes in your bid, that bid goes to a contractor, you pay for the material. What we've heard in other, I don't know if it's in our subordinate districts, maybe it's road associations more, which we aren't involved in. but is where the Forest Service or the DNR might have material that they are willing to say, here you go. And then the person, you know, the road association would then spread the gravel. So free material, but you have to put it down.
The only example of that currently in practice would be Irish Creek, which only receives winter services. You know, in summer it is I believe DNR road. And so that's up to the DNR to maintain that roadway. They are not a summer SGSD. So it's dealing with those kind of situations.
So
Commissioner Mills.
Yeah, the question is, to what degree do we want to engage the other agencies?
Correct.
And so in my mind, like, I think that's a good idea. In practice, I don't know.
Right.
Right? Is it practical? What liabilities are there? What benefits are there? And so, what do I know about it, right? Like,
Well, and in conversations we've had with both those entities, it's, you know, you have people that live on a road. People demand more service than, say, timber hauling requires.
Sure.
And so, so, you know, and so really if the road is serving the purpose for the Forest Service or the DNR,
right.
then anything above and beyond that, when we've had conversations with them, is typically viewed as, I don't want to say unnecessary, but something that isn't a priority then. You know, the people that are there now are the ones that are kind of, that's why we have these subordinate districts.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, I think it's a good idea, but I just don't know. It feels like just one more thing on your plate to have to check off for no benefit. But
So we could have it in as guidance.
There's a liability there that I'm not aware of, so that's what I'm like, I don't know.
Well, I think one, you know, and I don't know that we need to address it or, you know, fix it today, but I think the one thing this points towards is if there's, and I'll bring up Onion River Road for an example, a road that the you know, Forest Service won't pay for plowing. It's not a county road, so we don't plow it. And there are other entities who may or may not be paying for it to be plowed. How does it get service? And so if the only easy alternative is become an SGSD and it's a Forest Service road, then should it be addressed in this, how that whole relationship works? And so I think right now it's a little bit of a, maybe potentially a hole in the policy. Because if unless we're going to keep adding roads to, or changing jurisdictions to roads, more of these roads will become an issue than less. That's a solution. That wasn't a solution.
That's what I was just like, and
So what?
And maybe this first part is just more of a guidance thing, because it's not, you know, policy I feel like is some things we can enforce, right? Rules to follow.
Right.
This is more of a, hey, if we know Irish Creek Road is a DNR road, and we know, just in theory, if they wanted summer services, well, we at least know who to contact at the DNR to say, hey, do you have gravel? And okay, do we leave that out of the bid then? And say, the only thing that then this subordinate district will bid for is the spreading of that gravel, because the DNR will give something like that. So we can just leave it as guidance.
But then the highway department is doing the footwork, not the labor, rather than the
Correct.
subordinate district people.
Right.
So that's more government time to do this, and the subordinate districts is not to be a burden on our highway department.
So then it could be, here's the contact for the DNR.
Right.
Now
So
you
guidance
guys figure
not
it out.
included.
Yeah.
Right. That's
That-
Right?
important distinction, though.
I mean,
Yeah.
does that feel like you're hanging out there, or it's still a hole if we just have it as guidance, or?
No, I think that's fine. I mean, it's what it is. And this by no means is a perfect solution to our growing issue we have up here.
Well,
this could
no.
be an annual presentation.
It's
where we-
a way that we're addressing what are the staffing issues that you have, what is your capacity given your current staffing? And then how do we prepare for what we know is going to be growth in the future? And so I see this as being something that will evolve, and maybe it's annual, maybe it's every few years, but it's something that's going to be dynamic and will be changing.
And realtors need to explain very clearly to people that buy property that, nope, winter comes, you are on your own. You're a mile to the road, and you better have a snowplow if
Right.
you want to live there.
Call the beaver in.
Yeah,
And
there you go.
don't call us. I mean,
Right.
Or
Nope.
be a part of the association, find out from your neighbors.
if
You
there
know,
is an
is there-
association.
Yeah.
Right.
If there is something that you can join to
Right.
Right.
have a group discussion.
And
Right.
I want to emphasize too that I don't think this policy is all-inclusive by any means yet. I get, scenarios come up very regularly that I don't know how to deal with, and I don't think this addresses yet. For example, we have SGSDs that are unwilling to grow, meaning whoever the representative is does not wish to have more people involved for whatever reasons, whether it's because they don't want higher taxes, or a higher levy on their SGSD, whatever. But then you have more properties being developed on that road. So,
The
yeah,
second SGSD.
and if people don't buy into that idea of growing an SGSD, then what?
Yeah.
There's no rules for that in here. Like I said, I think this is gonna keep coming up as these things become more prevalent.
And it sounds like before I would want to include something in policy, but we would have to have a much better relationship, understanding with the other road owners, like the Forest Service or the state, just to be on that same page, because right now it's just kind of
Right.
off and on, or maybe, or usually not, or.
And some of it gets to the things we've talked about road jurisdiction, and at what point is it just, nope, now you're a county road?
We have that authority?
You do.
Should we talk about some of those discussions?
Yeah. No, but I mean, they're honest ones. They're very real ones. And the more, I feel like a very recent uptick in folks in the Tom Lake area, like very direct phone calls, and several of them now at this point, on why aren't you fixing X road? Well, yeah, they need one out there. And so I think a lot of that is coming down the pipe much sooner than any of us would prefer. And it's just, how do we want to do it? We can keep doing
This is a slippery slope into road jurisdiction. It's really quick.
It honestly is, or, figuring out that, but not to sidetrack on road jurisdictions.
Yeah.
That could be a whole other thing. So I think at least in the first part, I think guidance is good. And then we have the rep from the subordinate district. We can provide a contact number, but then they work it out with them.
Right.
Say, here's where you put it, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Under establishment, that was kind of, even though it's only a couple of short paragraphs, there was a lot of conversation there. The very first comment I have is kind of an initial condition assessment. And there was a lot of discussion about who does that condition assessment. And so what we kind of decided in committee was a third party prior to the formation of the subordinate district. So that's not us, that's not somebody on the road, that's just somebody else. So then the question was, that's not free, who pays for that? And so the idea was, do we add language that says, at the expense of the subordinate district?
Yes.
Seems very straightforward. Each.
I could follow that one pretty well.
All right. Some of the other, I'll just add, not topics of conversation that happened that were also in this establishment part had a lot to do with a roadway representative, who gets to talk to who, the flow of information and all of that. We spent a lot of time, I think, going over that, if you guys remember. And kind of what the committee landed on was, it's not our responsibility to get involved with neighborhood politics. And so just whoever your rep is, we will talk to them. If we cannot get a hold of them, then there is an alternate we will get a hold of, and that is that. We are not in the business of dealing with unresponsive roadway representatives. We are not in the business of dealing with he said, she said, they said, and all that. Nope. It comes up a lot. And so I think we just wanted to kind of spell that out a lot more. And also, we don't need to have some fancy election. I'm content if somebody sends me an email or sends Matt an email and says, here's who our elected rep is. It does not to be some Google verified online poll. It does not need to be, no, I know. It's anyways, we spent a lot of time talking
We
about
understand.
this. So, is there any questions up there on it? I think so far
That
seems pretty fine. Okay. Really, the next things that came up, at least for conversation, came all the way down for the reimbursement part, reimbursement for services, and really the administrative fee. I think the timing is good. I think Brady had just sent an email about a upcoming meeting to talk about fee changes, and so this was one of them. So what we did is we reached out to MIS and the auditor's office just to see, hey, how much time are you guys spending on this? Because we knew none of that was reflected in here. So the initial fee, it's like the third sentence under administrative fee. The initial fee before we did these revisions was $1,200. And so after talking with each of those offices, we upped it to $2,100. It sounds like both, let me see my notes, auditor's office, at least $300 for going over all the setup. MIS can expect, 10 hours per district, $60 an hour, so $600. So we just said, okay, add that in. Any questions about that?
And generally, how a SGSD is set up is it starts in the auditor's office and then moves to us. And I also want to include MIS because of Kyle's work with that. I mean, he does a lot of work as well. So, yeah. I know Brady was here briefly, but.
Right. But yeah, okay.
Thank you for.
Yeah.
Wonderful, absolutely, yeah. And then it might even be, at the very end. So this was another big one, and this will kind of open up a little can of worms here. So really, we just have, it's called Appendix A, Recommended Road Vegetation Clearance Standards. So the initial idea for this was just so emergency vehicles can get down the road. This spurred a lot of conversation because, to kind of summarize it, almost all of our subordinate districts don't meet this. So what do we want to do about that? And not only that, but there are so many other things. Turnarounds. A lot of our subordinate districts don't have turnarounds. Well, you need those. You have a grader, you have a plow truck, you have whoever is doing your plowing needs to get turned around somewhere. Again, emergency vehicle access, plowability of the road condition. Is this part of the initial assessment that we talked about before? We did look at reassessing fees. Is there anything else under this one?
No, I
Yeah.
mean, again, this is only version 2.
Right.
Of I'm
this
sure
policy.
version 3 will come out within the next couple of years.
And so, something that we had initially talked about was naming this like required minimum standards. But then to the point of none of our districts or most of them don't meet this, do we leave it then as recommended? But if it's recommended and nobody's following it, why do we have it? Like why are we going to say this is a thing if nobody's going to follow it? What's the point? Right? If there's no enforcement behind it, if there's no, you need to do this, or you won't be a district anymore, type of thing.
Well, having the clear cutbacks from the road for emergency vehicles, couldn't insurance companies say,
Right.
whose responsibility is that to say, to the agents to say, if you don't cut this back, who knows, but there are a number of places, like just down on Stonegate, where you drive in, or a Big Bay Road, and the trees are thick on each side, and you kind of brush the side of your vehicle going in, and that's not a good thing to do.
Yeah, and we actually, this small paragraph in an SGSD policy is actually part of a larger discussion that we don't actually have a vegetative clearance policy or guideline for the county roads, let alone the SGSD.
I'll do
So-
as I say.
Right.
As I do.
Right.
Yeah, and so,
Oh,
that's actually a larger issue of like, and we don't have anything to lean on when the public says, you know, you can't cut this tree because I live on a cartway or whatever. You know, there's examples that come up all the time of actually we don't have something to lean on even on the roads that we have jurisdiction over necessarily.
oh, so it wasn't you guys that have been on Camp 20 Road last week, and it looks like you could land an airplane on it, and this one house, the Weber's house, in 30-some years, the only way I could see, long time, is if you slowed down as you went past, you could kind of see one corner of the house. Every single tree is cleared. I can see the
I don't
whole
think that's
cabin.
us.
The whole.
That sounds-
No, it was somebody in
Yeah.
black shiny cop trucks with something, it was not local, and all this equipment, and all the way from the North Road, all the way down to the, well, it was really,
Was it along the power line?
yeah, and it was along the power line.
That's-
okay. I
Oh,
was
yeah,
like-
but it's like these huge,
Right.
like the whole,
Right.
I
There's,
mean, you see the stumps that they left, the stumps.
Yeah.
Right.
The stumps on the ground of the trees they cut, and then down in Chicago Bay Road too. Somebody lost one of their great big 60-foot tall, 100-year-old trees. One half of it was cleared from the base all the way up. It's still standing, and I thought, well, at least they only took half of one instead of both. You know, but I couldn't say that. I just said, I'll find out who did this.
Right.
But I'm glad you have put this in here, because at our emergency preparedness meetings, every time we meet, we talk about people not being able to get down roads.
Mhm.
We talk about people not being able to get down driveways when there is an emergency response. What's happening when we have a major fire and somebody can't get down there? They're not going down there to, if it looks tight, they're not gonna go down there. And so, you know, it's nice to see it here, but I do think it's a larger piece that we will need to address.
And for the county side of things, you know, Matt's correct in what he's saying. We don't have a policy written.
Right.
We do have, however, Minnesota statutes, and so it's just hopping around in those to figure out what we can clear, what we can't clear in that. I think a policy, even if it's as short, once we get to it, as our calcium chloride policy, and that's our goal, is to just like, here's exactly where these statutes are, instead of me having some notepad on my desktop that's like, wait a second, remember this random thing you found, you know, as they come up. And so, you know, to this extent, you know, this is different. Obviously, these aren't county roads. These are private or Forest Service or DNR roads. And so again, the question was coming back, you know, is this recommended or required? And do we grandfather everybody in after this? But then how much do we want to, what's the enforcement look like on that? Can we enforce something like this on a non-county road?
And, you know, I think.
And do we want to?
Well, that or the plow, you know, the plow service is gonna be working the road. They could just be like, I'm not doing this because you guys didn't do this, or it wouldn't be an enforcement, it'd be a
We just charge them
recommended.
more, just
Yeah.
charge them more, and it doesn't make any difference. There's one place
They
on
still
Stone
can't do it, right.
that in 15 years, never seen anybody, that anyone had ever been to that house, but the heat's always on. We plow it to keep the LP tank available.
Ghosts.
What was it this
Yeah.
year even with, was it this year, the summer maintenance or the winter maintenance? We actually had to remind a few contractors to call, so we're still down to like one bidder that is on each of these, that is keeping this system afloat.
I had to call half of the
There we
contractors the day the bids were due.
Right.
I mean, that's no joke, you know, that's.
It's like, that's where this sits.
Well, it's a business someone could get into.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and it's nothing against the contractors, they're busy,
Yeah,
But
they're
it's-
super busy.
but it's to the point
They
of,
live in their greater.
you know.
Yeah.
So, but, yeah, so this last part, I guess, I'm curious, you know, I don't know,
I'm comfortable with it as recommended for now.
Just leave
I
it.
think, you know,
right,
we will be revisiting.
Yeah,
this.
I think it will, and I think it's important to get it out there.
Right.
Have it out there, and it's gonna build or change or something. But
It gives us an opportunity to educate.
yeah,
Right.
It's a good first,
Right.
second step or wherever we're at.
And to the point, I mean, we have heard from contractors that are like, I'm not bidding on that because it is tight, or because the road is X, Y, and Z. And so that does eliminate people from bidding, just that alone.
Do you give that feedback back to the SGSD
Mhm.
rep?
That's great.
And maybe even,
I think that's important, that they know why they're not giving any bids.
Right.
Mhm.
maybe even including, and maybe that's not necessary, but maybe even including if recommended road clearances are met, maybe, it doesn't say that, does it? Yeah, it doesn't say
Like bids are
bids
effective.
are, hard, may not come in, or whatever,
Right. Adding that in as a
It's
tidbit,
not,
I
it's
think
not
that'd be
enforcement,
good.
it's just a, hey, heads up. you
Right.
might be Shooting yourself in the foot here,
Yeah, the
That's a good
fact if
point.
you don't have these clearances may impact your ability to get bids for your subordinate governmental services.
Right.
Mhm.
let alone emergency services.
Let alone, yes, an ambulance or a fire truck. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thanks. All right, moving right along. So these next two are actually, I think they're new.
Brand new.
Brand new policies. Yeah, our goal is to, like, in the event Matt and I win $10 million, we're not dying, and we win lots of money, that there's just a book, and someone can just pick up the book and say, here's how the highway department runs. Make it easy. Try
And
to
as
at
well
least.
as, for the board to know what our level of service is, as well as the citizenry, because, honestly, a lot of our calls can be solved by having not solved, I shouldn't say that, that's a better word, assisted by having a policy that you can fall back on. And right now, we kind of don't for a couple different
Right.
services that we do.
Right. And so signs lately has been a thing. I've written about it a few times. We talk about it a lot. Speed limits, warning signs, regulatory signs. Do they work? Do they not? Address signs. Yes.
Signs.
Signs.
How about, they had a little bit of an accident up in Grand Portage because of where the bridge is not in place.
Correct.
And somebody just went nose first because there were no barricades up. to
But
people that they should.
correct that statement right now. There were barricades up.
Oh,
Yes.
more than enough, somebody went around it. Maybe. I
We're
don't
waiting for
know.
the sheriffs to finish their investigation to see what happened. So, but I think it would be important to not say that. Because there were.
I this to anyone that
Sure.
came from a band member who said, well, it was about time they put up a band. And I was like, I don't know, I haven't been here in a while. Just
Fair enough. Yes. No, I was say, yeah, no, I definitely talked to Bobby once I heard about it. And it sounds like obviously people are hurt, but they're okay. And yeah, it's just one of those super unfortunate things where you put these traffic control plans in place that have several layers of, hey, don't come here. And I think the timing too, my understanding is they were doing work on the road. So one of the layers was removed. And so, yeah, now what is there are giant concrete barriers on top of another layer, on top of something else. So hopefully that does not happen
We'll see
again.
how long it takes.
Correct, yes. But yeah, no, every construction project we do has a traffic control plan. Those plans come from the Minnesota Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. There are layouts for that, there's things to follow. The goal is to never just make it up willy-nilly, so, and that's kind of where this policy comes from, is looking at what's referred to as the MUT, because saying Minnesota Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices is very long. So we just call it the MUT, the MUTCD, and that's where we pull all of this from, though. And so what's interesting is that it gives us, in some cases, a lot of leeway on what we can do. Believe it or not, Cook County has mostly low-volume roads. And what's interesting is I believe low volume in some circumstances is even anything under 1,000 vehicles per day, potentially. Sometimes it's 400 or 500, yeah. And so, again, lots of leeway, though, meaning we don't have to sign the bejesus out of our roads as if it was Highway 61 or someplace in Wayzata or something, I don't know. So what we wanted to do is really try and spell out what our thoughts were, on certain things. Again, I'm not going to go through and read this in its entirety. I think some of the things that we went over, at least in Highway Committee, we didn't get through the whole thing, because it got into the weeds pretty quick. Some of it was just, you know, horizontal alignment signs, for example. The yellow signs before you get a curve, some of them are just an arrow, sometimes there's nothing, sometimes chevrons, sometimes a speed limit sign with an arrow. When should we do what? And so what's nice is a while ago we had finished, what's the name of the program? The CARS program. So we drive around the county and it measures all the turns and it measures the speed you take it, and then it actually pulls the info out of the mutt and then based on your data says here's what it should be. And so that was kind of neat. And what we learned was there was actually a lot of unnecessary signs out and about in the field. And so we have been in the process of removing them as this program recommends. You know, the Gunflint Trail, we tried to incorporate that into the policy as well. Since it's a scenic historic byway, we get even a little more leeway with that one. And so that, you know, is its own conversation as well. I'm trying to think.
And the fewer, a reminder too, that the fewer the signs are, the fewer signs we have to replace.
Right.
Right.
So, you know, making sure that the signs that are up are actually the important ones, I think is the general theme of the policy.
Right.
Then the other cool thing that I think Josh proposed was that essentially 1/20th of the county will be replaced every year. 1/20th of the signs. So every 20 years, you have completely new signs, which is very important for retro reflectivity. So that's really the new stuff coming out of this is that kind of regimented replacement.
Because there's guidance on different ways to measure retroreflectivity in signs. You can buy a super fancy device that does it. It costs several thousands of dollars. Or we read a lot of research and they recommend like 20 years. And so that's where the 1/20th, and then 1/20th might sound very small. Why don't we do more? Well, 1/20th of all of our signs is still, I believe, several hundred signs a year that'll get replaced. And that doesn't include, you know, if they blow down or if something else happens.
And we have one dedicated sign person who does other things within the maintenance department, so it's, it's within their scope.
Right. So, but at least that's in there now. An interesting one we did talk about, and I'd be curious everybody's thoughts, obviously, is, you know, we name roads in this county. Name roads once there's 3 addresses. I believe it's at least 3 addresses on a private roadway. Then it becomes a named road. So that's how that works. Blanket statement: stop signs should be installed at every intersection, or not every intersection, but where you kind of have that stuff happening. So there's several examples though where, and I'm sure you can all think of it in your own districts, where that would look really funny to have, you know, certain super low, you know, maybe there's 5 addresses on that road, so it's a named road, and it would come up to a county road. Now, should there be a stop sign there? And so where we landed with it is I can think of a few, specifically by my house on 45. It's called Amick Trail, if you're familiar with the area. I think that one I think is so unnecessary. Doesn't make any sense. I think it would look silly. People know to stop. You're going from a tiny little road onto a main road. You do not need a stop sign. But again, we're trying to eliminate this gray area that can exist sometimes. And so I know you're not going to get rid of the gray completely, and maybe it is just case by case all the time, or within these circumstances, but I don't want to oversimplify and say it's a vibe check when you go look at it. And I know that sounds funny, but it kind of is, you know?
But the problem is that
Yes.
we had, at the end of our Blue Reed Road and, I forget what Craig called his place, his driveway, and Camp 20 Road, is somebody who's just visiting. And they blow through.
Right.
And so we have vacation rentals. People that, you know, they don't recognize it. Just because it seems like 4 people a day use the Camp 20 Road,
Right.
and it's gravel and you don't see anybody, that maybe somebody's coming right on your left, and maybe you should slow down, or
Right.
from your right, because they, instead of blowing straight across,
Right.
thanks to you, we've had no accidents, thank you for the 2 stop signs. And then the man from out of state moved, so that's good.
There we go.
Was that the bigger factor?
Yeah, he was the one that was just like flying down, I mean, it's a
Right.
long hill down to the,
Yeah.
you know,
Why not?
And a lot of times, that conversation can go into kind of other things, like speed limits. You're never going to capture everybody in a practice or a policy. You set speed limits based on an 85%, right? So 15% of people are going to be ignoring or are going faster than what you're recommending. But research and what have you is suggesting that that's the number you do. So similarly, right? Yeah, there's going to always be a person or two or whatever that are going to completely blow an intersection or do something. I've experienced that as well. But now, do the majority of people follow it? So our policy should reflect that. Like, what's the majority of action that is happening, right? I feel like a blanket statement, in my opinion, is a blanket statement of every single intersection should have a stop sign. It's too much.
That's what I was just gonna ask,
Yeah.
this, the way it's written. The
Correct.
Onyx Trail
It would have it,
I
and
think
just
people
like,
would lose their minds.
well, we're right, and it just
But
doesn't,
you-
it doesn't pass the
it's
sniff
like-
test,
It's like the stop sign that in your brain you justify really slowing down and then going because you know that the only other person that lives up there does not leave their house until 1:30 in the afternoon, and we're at 7
Right.
o'clock in the morning. So you can roll through that stuff.
well, and yours, and again, the case by case too, I'll keep picking on Amic Trail, is you get there and you can see a very long distance in either direction. It is very clear, the distance over the ditch is long, I mean, you can see. Versus, I think kind of what we're talking about here is a little different. We're, I think, on a curve.
Right on the 92-degree corner, with that huge tree right there. You
Right.
can see it.
So again, that allows a little case by case,
Yeah.
a judgment to be made. And so, I don't know if any other thoughts.
Because in our driveway, we can hit 35 miles, I have hit 35 miles an hour going home. And that, the other one, Frank's Way, that's the name of the road. I'm sure you could go much faster on that one. Because there's nothing there but the road.
Yeah,
Very wide.
I'm trying to think about, when I'm driving, so say for instance, I was a visitor, staying in a short-term rental on an unknown road. And so this is just me, right? But when I get to an intersection where there's no stop sign, I might stop more, because I don't know what's going on. It's
Yeah.
like,
That would be-
so it's just, a lot of it's driver dependent too. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to think through all this and
Right.
balance the safety with the sign and what's required and what's not.
And,
If it's not required,
no,
yeah, then it's,
and
Well,
actually,
it's good driver.
it is.
I mean, it's good
Yeah.
driver.
In uncontrolled intersections, a little side tangent to this, but talking about intersections, and we've talked about this a little bit in Highway Committee, and believe it or not, but yeah, uncontrolled intersections are actually some of the safer types of intersections.
Yeah. because no one's assuming that someone's gonna
Right.
stop, and so everyone's like.
Right.
Yeah.
So, there's something to that as well.
Interesting,
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah. So I mean,
Yeah, so I don't like the blanket
no,
must,
right. And
Shall.
I know engineering judgment sounds funny, but that isn't actually like legitimate phrase. It's in code, it's in a lot of things where it instead of saying, gray area or whatever, it allows you to look at things like, okay, yours is on a 90-degree turn with poor sight lines and whatever. Okay, so that makes sense. Amic Trail does not make sense. There's plenty of sight. You can see it. It's different, And then any other scenarios, at least an opportunity to go put eyeballs on it and say, does this make sense? That's where I would lean, but open to.
Yeah, no.
I mean, it sounds, I think that makes sense. It sounds like, again, reliability potentially, or
Mhm.
more burden, So,
Mhm.
but, I mean, I trust engineering judgment.
That's good.
Uh,
That's good.
So, I would rather have that than the blanket, I guess.
Yeah.
But again, I'm a little uncomfortable with that too,
That's part, and like we were talking, we're never gonna capture everything, you can't. You know, and there is, you know, the liability component, you know, I forget the statute off 169 point something off the top of my head, but drivers have to drive with care, that's in law.
Yeah.
All of us have to do that, no matter what is posted. And that's a thing people forget a lot of
Common
times.
sense.
Since those, our stop signs have been put up, I've never met anyone, ever. Never.
Wow.
Somebody's coming on the road, but they're down there, but otherwise,
Right.
never met anyone.
So the next one, and we were talking about horizontal alignment signs a little bit. So again, this CARS program, what was truly fascinating is and I'm not saying a few signs are coming down, it was a significant reduction in the amount of horizontal alignment signs that are gonna be out in the field. But something that's come up a lot is if chevrons are justified, should we put them up? A lot of people are anti-chevron, not just on the gunflint, but overall. And chevrons also are like one of the most effective signs for drivers. Like that's one of the ones that's like, yep, people pay attention to that one. Arguably one of the most annoying ones, but still. So, you know, something we were toying with was, are chevrons justified if, on the whole, we're reducing signs? Like the number of signs in the field is going down, but we're putting up the ones that are affected, or most effective, you know? Curious your thoughts on that.
Coming cross-country in the dead of night on back roads,
Mhm.
wherever there's our chevrons, I like those.
Yeah,
Same.
right.
Yeah.
Same. Yep, it helps, like, okay,
Okay,
this one's for
one-
real.
Yes.
Well, and it's true though, that's the point. That's the point of this, is you're
They
like,
are
oh, I should listen to this.
Yeah.
And all it takes is when you're in a new part and you hit one curve because you're ignoring, and you're like, oh no, I should have taken that at 35. You better, you pay attention.
We're supposed to keep turning?
Right. They
Right,
still
right.
going, yeah.
And then on low volume roads, and I don't know if it gets into it later or not, we have even more leeway to, I don't want to say have nothing, but that exists. Of like, once it gets down to a certain point, I don't believe we're obligated to put up anything. That's it. Like as far as warning signs are concerned, right?
Overall local volume, right?
Not all, a lot are,
Oh.
yeah. But I think the chevron run is interesting just because of how a lot of times you hear maybe more complaints about those than anything. But they are the most effective, and if, on the whole, if more signs are coming down, is then putting those up, you know, does that make sense?
I find them the most useful, like Commissioner.
They're
was saying.
effective.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I am not familiar with the complaints,
Sure.
so I guess I can't speak to those.
Sure.
I'd like to learn more about that, the complaints.
It's just because you're putting up, you know, 7 of them along a curve or whatever, and there's, you know, you're just putting up 7 signs on my backcountry road that were never there before. Why are you doing this? You're
Yes, I
turning
can
the
see
place
that.
into Brainerd,
Yeah, I can see that, yeah.
et cetera, et
But-
cetera.
But I'm trying to think of where that would be, where it's like,
Pick a
Identify the
road.
road for them.
Yeah, well, I mean, they come up on the gunflint,
Gunflint.
and
And a
so
lot,
some have come
Gunflint
up.
Trail Scenic Byway talks about this.
Right, but like the
regularly.
gunflint specifically, like there are curves that,
Oh, yeah.
what's that?
Northern Light Lake,
Yeah.
turn.
right there.
Yep.
Yep.
The Sawbill. I mean, honestly, all of our roads, Murmur Creek Road, the turn on 45, where
Yeah.
Murmur Creek hits it, technically that should be chevrons. And that even gets my hackles up. I don't want to see them.
Yeah, yeah.
But, you know,
Those seem like, well, that seems like a low volume, or is that not a low volume?
I forget what
Gunflint
that's,
Certainly is not low volume.
right. And it depends which part. If we're at the end of the trail, I think it is. But it depends which part we're on. And I think low volume and different types of signs means different things. I think one cutoff is 1,000 cars per day. A different cutoff is like 400 cars per day or something like that. So we can dig into that and determine what that needs to be. But I think what we were looking for here is, can we justify chevrons if we're reducing the overall quantity
Yeah.
of signs, knowing that they are
I think for
effective as
safety
well.
reasons, Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, they get our attention.
Right,
We've all
right.
experienced that.
And I think we're all on the same page that we're not looking for more signs, we're not looking to wear
No.
good chevrons, but there are some situations where they can be very effective. And if it's still reducing overall signs, I feel better with that. But
Right.
the impact, of course, is going to be right there, right?
Right.
As far as the sign impact or whatever complaints there are, so.
Right.
um,
And in certain scenarios, another substitute for chevrons is just the arrow
Mhm.
pointing left or right or whatever. Typically, if the curve is
Like a
super,
right angle one?
yeah, like if it's super tight, then, you know, we've talked about putting up those instead of chevrons. But that, again, is kind of case by case and what the field looks like.
If you're leaving town going east, when it's really dark on the highway,
Mm.
there aren't many, I mean, there are reflective lights or reflections everywhere from at the end of people's driveway,
Mhm.
there's some road signs, it's on their mailboxes, that it's just a whole steady reflection all the way out. I don't know how far out, but it's a long ways. There's no darkness on the highway.
Mhm.
It's annoying.
Do something.
Do something about that. Well,
Hold 'em up.
what we did decide to do actually up here, getting back to retroreflectivity, is instead of doing everything typically nowadays is diamond grade, DG3, we do one below that. And so we can do, I think it's high intensity prismatic or something. So that's still legal. It's not as bright as the DG3 signs are, but you still, I mean, up here, because we have no ambient lighting, even when we put up a new sign and it's a lower grade reflectiveness, you're still going, whoa, you know, it catches your attention still, so, yeah. But I can't do anything about mailboxes, sorry. I know, it's okay. Okay, so some of the next ones we were talking, sled dog crossing signs. I like those, because that is so quintessential up here. I don't know anyone else that has those. So something we had in there was very specific roads. County Road 14 and County Road 60. Do we need to be road specific? You know, do we need to say specifically those roads? Or, you know, I know historically that seems to be sled dog country is there. But I don't want to, I guess, dissuade people in other.
It is also in our zoning. That's
Yeah.
where they get to be.
Oh.
Right.
Well, there we go then.
Area.
It's the ghetto. No, well, now wait a minute. Camp 20 Road, at one point, there were almost 1,000 sled dogs down there
Hmm.
between Labota's and, can't think of all their names.
So maybe we just kind of refer to our zoning where.
Right.
Well, it's not zoning.
We're allowed by
It's the
zoning.
comprehensive land use guide plan.
Guide.
And so it's there, but it's less enforceable than zoning, right? It's more of a guide.
Mm.
But I think, like, I think what I heard Engineer Pat saying is that calling these out specifically is maybe restricting having them in other areas, or what? I mean,
Well, and I was just,
One
Or you-
down by Labota's on Night Train, that's his old driveway before he moved. But
Maybe.
wasn't there a sign way down on Camp 20 Road with
I don't know.
sled dogs?
I don't
We'd
know,
have to look at our sign inventory.
somebody took it.
maybe.
That happens a lot.
That
Does.
So
You know,
dog
or
crossing
does,
signs?
or does it happen where, yeah, maybe people live not in these areas and now want more of these put up elsewhere in the county?
Huh?
And so now we're saying no, because you have to live on 14 and 60.
Right, that's what I was.
Yeah,
That's what I
As
was-
opposed to what if a little pocket happens up here, so, you know, I don't
Well,
know.
Irish Creek Road has sled dogs.
Mm.
I think referring to the comprehensive plan
Yes.
is the way to do it.
Maybe I'll put that in there.
And you don't need to use the road if you have a trail net, or trail system cut out.
You're just, but you're crossing the road, so it's for those individuals
You
that
have
are
to cross the
crossing.
road, but if you
Right.
have enough acreage behind you to cut trails, you don't have to cross the road.
So maybe what I'll do is, maybe we won't be road specific, but we'll just say some reference to
As
The land
allowed
use.
by the Cook County
the
Comprehensive.
land use plan. Okay, that sounds good. I know I'm skipping over a lot, and so are there
We've
other
looked through
questions about other areas in here? I'm just gonna go to kind of the highlights. So we did want to include, obviously, a very specific part for the Gunflint. You know, historic scenic byway, you know, we work with the scenic byway committee a lot. I know we had come up with a very, you know, kind of an initial sign policy. It was pretty darn short, and I think this is basically copy and pasted out of that into here, so now it's part of our main one. Really, the big one kind of gets back to the horizontal alignment component, is, again, chevrons, you know, is kind of historically been a big no-no, like very anti, don't do that, because you're putting up, right, 7 of these, you know, however many it is along a curve. But again, if they're overall on the trail, I think, didn't Josh say he took down like 200 or 300 signs? I think just along the trail?
Yeah, I can't say whether it's just the trail or.
It was a
system-wide.
lot. And so, you know, if there's an overall reduction, is it okay now to say, well, let's put these up and then they work? You know, then it's very specific. It's intentional on what's up there. And should we also allow ourselves to stray from the CARS analysis? So if the CARS analysis says chevrons, if we're able to look at it and be like, well, it's kind of borderline, let's do the arrow with the recommended speed underneath instead. Because we know it's historic, because we know
We can
it's
say
scenic.
may instead
May.
of will.
Well, right.
May.
And so I think that's an important distinction as well. Yeah, I don't know. Sounds pretty good to me. Cool.
Yeah, and I'm happy to revisit this, right? This is a
Mhm.
brand new policy, and so when we start getting phone calls and feedback, like, I just hate to go through a bunch of work as far
Mhm.
as putting them up
No
and
doubt.
then
Right.
down, right?
And I know, and we actually, we haven't talked about it in a
That's what
little.
we're here for.
Yeah, we haven't talked about it in a little while at the committee, but I'm trying to remember, I feel like the last time we did, because obviously the concern is you can go down the slippery slope avenue of, well, now every curve will be that. And it's like, well, that's not the case. You know, and can we be nuanced and say it's very case by case, where if we say we're taking down 100 signs to put up 7, you know, is that fine? Like, that should seem fine. You're still looking at 93 signs that are now not along the trail anymore, you know? And I think that was, you know, and I think specifically with chevrons, we know they're effective. And that's the other thing, is any research you read shows chevrons work. And so you're going, okay, do we want to really make an exception because it's the Gunflint? Or do we want to just be, more nuanced with it and say, okay, we know this specific curve has an accident history, has all this other stuff with it that's like, we should put them there. Okay, wonderful. We talked about the 120th, and I don't know, is there anything else with signs? Any other questions with signs?
Well, just, I just want to, if we could, I'm sure we'll go back to the sled dog crossing one, because.
Oh, sure.
I like the idea of not calling out specific roads, because I feel like that excludes things.
Could you say in there, just for example, CASA 14 and County Road 6?
Oh.
But why? Like, it just, sled dog crossing signs will be maintained 500 feet in each direction of active trail crossings, as well as entry points to the general sled dog area in each direction, so.
Period.
Right.
I see
mean,
what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yep.
and that's, I mean, there's some up the trail, right?
Right.
Whatever, it's just, there are different ones in different parts of the county if they're active mushing trails. And so then there could be signs placed there if it's.
If that's a thing.
If people request it, or if guys.
Engineering
feel like it's
judgment.
Engineering judgment, that's thing to lean on.
All right.
But that just seems really, and then it says contact the mushers for input. Was this written with the input, or this was written and then asked for input, and was there input yet, or?
Josh wrote it and reached out to the groups. I don't know what correspondence they had.
Okay.
Right.
I was just curious.
Because
No
mushers-
concern.
mushers don't live forever, nor do their dogs. So we have fewer kennels in our neighborhood than we used to. And it's now primarily, I think, I don't know where that other person went, it's the Labotas, Charlie and Dennis. And their kennels are way back in, and they're next to each other.
Mhm.
And I don't know if they ever used the road, but
Good to know. The last thing I'll touch on is just the last couple of, I'll say even sentences, they're pretty short, but the modification and deviation from this policy, basically saying, at the end of the day, who's ever in my chair, or an authorized, representative, we can stray from this policy for a number of reasons, whether it's safety, social reasons, economic reasons, and then as long as we document why. And so we've kind of started to talk about that a little bit in certain ones, as, it can be as simple as a little note, here's why we said, the sight lines are great in either direction, no stop sign needed. Or the sight lines are awful in both directions, so we think a stop sign is necessary there. So it's kind of just adding that extra layer of, we're doing our best to capture everything up in the policy, but at the end of the day, we reserve the right to make a decision and justify why, and that's it.
amen.
There we go. Thank you. All right. One more. Now what are we on to here?
Calcium chloride.
Calcium chloride,
Fluoride.
our favorite topic.
It is. It's great.
Road stabilization.
That we talked about a lot. What should we even name the policy? So we use calcium chloride up here. Mag chloride, magnesium chloride is another option some counties use. Most of the time, it just gets down to cost. The cost between the two, from my understanding, is about the same. And so it just gets down to who's got what where. I think you can really get into the research, and there's pros and cons, and those, one might rust your car more, but is less bad for the environment, or vice versa. It's worse for the environment, but leaves your car alone. I think it's my understanding is it's kind of pulling hairs, whichever one you go with.
Splitting here.
Spilling hairs, thank you. Less painful. So for us, really, and this one we did include some examples in here, because with creating this policy, it was far more nuanced. It was, for us, we kind of looked at, I think it was St. Louis County and Lake County. For other examples, what do they do? Because we didn't have this before. We just kind of did our best. And so where we landed on was a traffic count of 100 as a starting point. Say, okay, if the road has more than 100 vehicles per day on it, and that's measured by MnDOT, then we'll treat the whole road. If it's less than 100, then we do not treat the road. But there are examples where we might deviate from that. Some of the other policies we looked at kind of had this middle one, where it said, maybe the lowest threshold was 50, and so anything under 50 wouldn't get treated. From 50 to 200, it would be between houses, or you do at houses or driveways, and then anything above 200, you do the whole road. What I'm worried about is we miss one. Now what? So I'm a fan, as I'm sure you are all aware, of trying to make it as black and white as possible, and say we're either going to do the whole road or we're not. So some examples, deviating from this 100 traffic count, and reasons why is really road geometry and budget. Haul routes is another component as well. Do we know there's gravel pits that even if it's a lower volume road, it gets used a lot? And so would that benefit? And so an example we give in here, the North Road does not meet the traffic threshold, 79 cars per day. So, but it's a long straight road, it's a wide corridor, we know people are going faster through there, so we say yes, it should get it. So that's kind of the thought process through that. Obviously, there's, we don't treat paved sections of road, it doesn't need it, which is great. Trying to think what else with this. Are there any questions on the chloride policy? I mean, it's kind of, yes.
So I've had several comments off of Caribou Trail,
Mm-hmm.
the roads there,
Mm-hmm.
going 3 miles.
Mhm.
Do you have a water tank?
Oh, I had that too.
Sure.
That
Yes,
you
just-
could go, because now we've had a little bit of rain.
Right.
Maybe what?
Right.
an inch point 3 or something.
Right.
But it doesn't help. So I've said, traffic count, he said, well, I don't know that. I have neighbors, but I can't say there's 50 of us
Right.
going up and down the road. So I just said, I'll get back to you.
Right. So we've talked about that a lot. And I think years ago, we tried to spray the roads with water to get them wet to grade,
Yeah.
and you can't put enough down. You can't, it doesn't soak.
Yeah.
Because you need it to go, because what we're doing, and Matt's talked about this a lot, is we're turning the road over. And so you need to get that moisture down several inches in order to do that properly, so that then you don't actually lose all your
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so to do it with a tanker would almost, I mean, you would probably need a tanker,
Yeah.
which we do not have. And then at that point, you know,
And it wouldn't work for, it would be very, very temporary, like an afternoon for dust control. I mean, it wouldn't, yeah.
Right.
But actually, it has more application for grading. Like if we could potentially wet a road, a section of road, like a hill, enough that we could actually do a little bit of grading. You know, this recent drought pointed out that could be something we pursue in the future. I don't think it would help for dust control at all.
June was no problem.
that was great.
Right.
September's the new June.
Yeah. And the one thing we were debating a lot, and whether we should even include it in here, is you know, a paragraph talking about budget. 'Cause really where this came from was the increase in price that we've been seeing for, I think, since 2009 to 2019, something like that. It was about $1 a gallon. Since then, I think we're, what, at $1.60 a gallon now, something like that. And so you're going from that to that in the span of 4 years is, we can't keep up with it. And so that's really where this came from, is can we be more deliberate with it? Other options is if we paved more, then you have less dusty roads as well. That's another probably separate conversation.
Oh, there's been good ones on that one too.
Yeah,
hasn't there?
absolutely. So, yeah.
So where does sodium chloride fit into this? That's just table salt, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
popcorn,
Yeah.
eggs, yeah.
Does it not have the same, or is it, it's just not even?
I don't know the
Either.
specific like attributes of it. I know, I mean, it almost sounds like we're just talking like winter salt at that point in time,
Yeah.
you know?
I'm just curious how it works or does not work.
Environmental.
And that too. And I was
That's a
curious about our briny wells.
Mm.
What is that? Is that sodium? Is that calcium? Is that
Right.
magnesium chloride?
There was a while ago, what was it, a few years ago, I think, I don't remember if it was the DNR or Soil and Water, was pulling out, what were they tracking? Was it no. It was calcium in the lakes. That's what it was. And so there was concern that in some of the lakes that were increasing, that it was because of our chloride applications. So what was fascinating though, is when you look at which lakes were increasing, they're nowhere near county roads. So it's not that. There's no baseline for that data, so they just started collecting it, I think, I can't
There was high
remember.
levels, not that it was necessarily.
Right, but, so that one I thought was kind of funny. I don't know if it was Tom Lake or, it was somewhere in that area though, where I was like, oh no, we don't, they're
Kemo Lake.
like 15 miles from a county road, like that's not us. But we also are very, very diligent. One of our maintenance crew does go out every time there's an application. And, you know, no matter what we may spec in blanket terms, he goes out there and then says, okay, turn it up, turn it down, stop here, you know, watch this. So we do try and mitigate the runoff as much as we possibly can.
And we do record all the gallons per roadway too, if that information's ever useful.
Right.
We can tell you exactly how much went down in any given road.
Right.
So what, do you know what that, the moles are?
Oh,
Of the,
like how much we put down?
like the ratio, yeah, what's our, no, not the total, but just like, what is the, because it's a liquid, right?
Right.
It's a solution, so
Right.
what is that?
You know what it is off the top of your head?
No, I mean,
Okay, I'm sure I can
Or
Google it.
up to a
but
gallon.
I'm just really-
Well,
I'm
it'd
like-
be in our specs, so I don't know off the top of my head, and that rate can
It's in the
change.
specs,
Yeah, we can specify more or less or whatever. And so with the application, yeah, you can You can take your dollar and stretch it further by not spraying the whole width of the road. You can spray less. But
Literally
again,
change the bar width, on the fly based on the width of the road,
right.
the lane.
So, that matters, and so that was part of this conversation was, well, can we keep what we've been doing, but spray less, basically, on each road? And we were like, I didn't like that. I don't think anyone really liked that idea, because you're kind of half, you get it. We're not gonna say that one. But, yeah, so anyways, trying to think. And then, the other thing is at the end of it, we do have people that will piggyback off of our chloride, whoever the contractor is that gets it. So if they just call, what we do is then just give their number to whoever gets it, and then they coordinate an application, and then they pay. It's no different than our contractors for our bigger construction projects. If people want driveways paved, a culvert replaced, gravel here or there, once I have a contractor, I just say, here you go. You guys figure that out. So, yeah. Is there any questions about calcium chloride?
Happy to see the policy.
Getting there, yeah. Cool. Anything else?
Any other questions or comments, commissioners?
Great.
Well, thank you so much. We will look forward to this coming back at us again.
Yes.
In the near future.
So I think what we'll do is we'll probably button these up, and then I don't know if it'll be by next week at a board meeting, but soonish. My goal was I wanted to go over like 7 of these at once, but
It's true, I talked him down.
you did.
Thank you, Matt.
You were welcome.
Yeah. Thank you all.
All right, have a great day. Appreciate it. We're going to take a short break and come back in 5 minutes to conclude our meeting. Thank you. Thanks, Jana. All right, well, we're returning now to our committee, the whole work session after a short break, and we have with us for our last two agenda items, Cook County Treasurer and Auditor Brady Powers. And first thing we're going to do is just talk about some additional information and adjustments to our preliminary budget for 2025.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, not a lot has changed since you approved the preliminary budget, and this is for the general fund in September. But a few of the items, we did discuss the estimate for professional service costs and maintenance, and had indicated that we would look at that again and adjust it, and it seems reasonable to reduce it $20,000. Depends on how many years back you look, and in the narrow view of a couple of years, it looked to be higher, but over about 5 years, this seemed a little more reasonable. So that's a reduction of 20,000. ARC, Arrowhead Regional Corrections, they gave us the final cost, and so that's a cut in expenses of over $30,000, 3882, and that includes the addition of hours
1.2 position.
for the probation person. So I think that's mostly because of the state money that went
Yes,
to
the
ARC,
subsidy.
correct? Yeah.
Was increased by the state. So just point out that that new position or increase in hours for that position, it's not costing us anything more levy-wise.
Yeah. It was a great time to do it. And now the library added $22,880. I hadn't received their final numbers when we did the preliminary, and so I'm not sure they hadn't. I hadn't heard from them, and I was too busy. Whatever. I didn't contact them until later, but they're supposed to contact us, but maybe they got a hold of somebody. But so anyway, that's an addition here, 22,880, because I was using last year's number as a placeholder. AIS, we just added the expense and revenue to the budget. It's a wash. They get more revenue than they spend, so we're building up a fund balance for AIS, but this is just adding those numbers. And then HRA housing. So we moved that into the general fund. That's at the recommendation of our auditors, Redpath, just to reduce. We were using a separate fund, Fund 16, so this just reduces one fund. It's just simplifies the accounting, but it's not sitting down there. It was shown under housing, if you look, and before that it was listed as HRA, so changed the name too. Some of this has been ongoing discussion with Redpath, our audit firm, as to what exactly is our HRA. So they've come down on the view that they are special taxing districts, same as EDA, but they're not asking to levy their own funds under the statute. They've been asking us to levy on their behalf. That's why it remains in the general fund rather than as a standalone item like EDA. So that's between us and the HRA board, but they wish it to be a county levy to this point. It doesn't make any difference to the taxpayers, just where it shows in the budget and on the tax statement. So that could be a discussion later if you want to see it differently. The last item, Human Resources, Allison realized that she had to budget for Skillsoft, that general training software that we use. It's kind of gone back and forth between the administration department and HR. And she says, I've got to pick that up, but it hadn't been in there until after the preliminary. So
this isn't new Skillsoft?
no,
software,
it just
it's the
hadn't been
one we already
budgeted.
have.
Yeah. And so the net change of all that, excuse me, I'm going on 2 weeks of this coughing. Anyway, I think it's around. I've heard other people. Is we left the approved levy at a 9.81% increase. All of these adjustments would bring it down to 9.62. And so you still have a lot of work to do.
Okay.
Decisions to make. You may be using some fund balance. But so this is not a lot of decision-making. This is really just adjustments that have happened.
But it's important for us to have
Yeah.
this information as we
Yeah.
contemplate what we want to do.
Yeah, and I'm sure Highway Department would have a similar list, and Human Services too. And you probably hear that at their meeting. If there aren't any other questions, I'll just move on to the fire levies.
Great.
Go ahead.
You know, when I first came on, we made an agreement to enter into a contract with the CIP consultants for a annual $20,000 a year support, technical support from them. Do you recall that?
I recall it being 1 year.
I don't.
Is this BKV or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we entered into a contract that they would be for support. I remember James talking. So.
CRBPS.
Or CRB,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, we have that, yeah.
Have we ever tapped into used it?
I don't know specifically, but, for example, we have a contract, and they do some work at monitoring at the YMCA. They've been doing that for a few years. I'm not sure about other things here.
All right, well, let's
Because
find
if
that
they-
out, yeah.
Break the contract. And break the contract, why are we paying for some services that we have not had any need for? I mean, we haven't, if it's for the deferred maintenance.
Right,
We've hired somebody new that, for more money, that can do that.
right.
Right, and so there's a redundancy.
Yep, we'll get that. Thank you.
Okay, I'll make a note on that, check on it. I don't recall seeing bills go by, but
One or two might
it's always possible.
go. Yeah, one or two that go across.
Okay. That's good. So on the fire levies, so we received all of those levies. You could see not a lot of change other than the Lutzen fire extension. They are adding some big equipment purchases this year, not just the extension, but the Lutzen Fire Department overall. This is just the portion that's paid outside of Lutzen, that the Lutzen Fire Department has taken responsibility for. So their portion of it is up, 91%, and that's, they're expecting to get a grant. They're hoping, but they're not sure. So when they know, if they know, they'll reduce that amount. But they may not do it this year, so they may collect that this year and then make a reduction next year, but in the event they don't get that grant, they're covered. So that's what that's about. And the rest of these are either status quo. Maple Hill has made no change. Gunflint Trail dropped theirs a little bit. They do heavy fundraising
Big.
On Maple Hill, so it's not that their costs for fire protection are going down, but they have a lot of support.
Yeah.
Community.
I've often said to them, they need to give lessons to all our other fire departments on how to raise funds. They're just amazing in the ideas they have, the creativity, and
Well, It does beg the question, not to be a devil's advocate here, but it does beg the question, should we be supporting our fire departments with hot dog sales or with levy dollars? You know, like, it's a
Both.
pretty important service, you know?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
bless them for raising it in other means, but it's still coming from, maybe it's not coming from the community, but I'm just feeling like it's still coming from our community members, so how do we want to support them?
But we still like our pancake breakfast.
And that too.
Yeah.
We still
Yes,
like our fish
absolutely.
sandwich on the 4th of July.
Absolutely, it builds community. Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is not about fire departments, but I think there's going to be a pasty fundraising at the hub.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So pasties, it's like, fire departments would do pasties.
Yeah,
There are a lot of grants that are available that they're able to,
oh, yeah.
get as well. I mean,
Yeah, that's a-
but Commissioner, you have,
Yeah, I just want to
Comment.
clarify, make sure I understand this correctly. Now, those fire department levies are for those areas, though.
Yes.
So,
mhm.
I guess I'm a proponent of that. That area, you get taxed on it. And somebody in Hoagland doesn't get taxed on because we need a new truck down in Lutzen, which I get. We all use it. We're all one community. It's pretty important. But it keeps, I'm all about local control, about local people deciding what does our department need, what do we want, just like I keep preaching to the state. Give it to us, we know how to spend it best. So I just will advocate that keeping those areas, those local levies, yes. We need to keep all of them funded well, and we should go to every pancake breakfast there is. Doesn't matter where it is in the county.
Yeah, and they all support each other.
Right.
They're always calling
I
out.
get that.
They share
mutual-
equipment, they
Yeah.
work together, yeah.
Yeah.
How one can all, it's kind of how it goes.
If you want to take the time, that's all I really have on that. I'd like to, or I could, share one other thing with you.
Absolutely.
Just on truth and taxation. There was a new law this year that states that, that counties will show a new fiscal disparities adjustment on the T&T statement. And the purpose of it is to show what the net effect on a parcel is. In any commercial property, will see their tax statement, and they'll see a number there for fiscal disparities, and it might be 300 or 4,000 or 20,000. And that does not tell them the effect of fiscal disparities. It tells them how much of their net tax capacity is getting taxed at this area-wide rate, which is much higher than ours. It's just how this formula works in statute. So it's telling them accurate number, but it doesn't say, because if fiscal disparities went away, that amount of their net tax capacity would still be taxed at the local rate. It's just not being taxed at this higher area-wide rate. So this is trying, so our representatives attempted to put something in that would say, hey, it says 20,000 on here, but the actual effect is really 15,000 if it didn't exist, not 20, or maybe it's 14,000 or something like that. I've used that as kind of a rough estimate over the many decades that, yeah, that's not accurate, but it's whatever that fiscal disparity number says in Cook County is somewhere in the 2/3 of what it's actually costing you to be in the fiscal disparities, what it costs you on your tax bill. So they spent, some counties, Department of Revenue, everybody spent months on this summer, because to get a really accurate number is darn near impossible, because you almost have to run taxes right now. And to be 100% accurate, you'd actually have to run taxes without fiscal disparity in your tax system at all, and then run it with, because fiscal disparities affects every parcel. Most of us, it's just a small effect. We're not a commercial property, but this complicated formula changes our overall net tax capacity. So we're all paying, in Cook County, paying a piece of it, but a small piece individually. I'm probably getting too far in the weeds already, but so the debate and the discussion all summer was, well, if it's not going to be really accurate, should we do this? Does it make sense? And so some counties are opting out of showing it. The Department of Revenue has said, we're not going to penalize you. We understand it's complicated and each one of you may think differently about it. And it's different in every county. St. Louis County, they're a beneficiary of it. So they look at it from a different viewpoint. Here, we always pay in. So my feeling right now is to let it go, to take the number that's going to be produced. It's not going to be 100% accurate, but it will show, it will give anybody that cares, that looks at it and say, yeah, 20,000 is really 15. At least it's close. It's not perfect. It tells you that you're not paying quite as much as what it says, because you're going to pay something whether you have fiscal disparities or not. So that's where I'm falling on it right now. So, and some are worried about having to explain it. Well, I mean, I've been explaining it here for 25 years, so kind of used to that, and trying to explain something that's almost unexplainable. But it shows, I just printed a sample, so it's like right at the bottom. It's just like a little add-on. It just says fiscal disparities adjustment. This one, it has a fiscal disparities tax of $136 up here in the body of the statement, and right at the bottom it says adjustment $21.87. So it says it really isn't costing you that, it's costing you that. Well, these relative numbers don't work in Cook County, but this is just some fictional county.
Do you think people might think I'm getting taxed up by both of them, or do you think it's clear enough that that adjustment is clear enough?
I don't think. How do I know what somebody thinks? But I don't think so. And it's below the body of it, and we can direct them. There's places on the Department of Revenue website that they've tried to explain it, and we'll just point them that too if they want to, if they need more information. And they're going to work on this more next year. Kind of like every time someone tries to adjust the TNT notice, it seems to be a thornier problem than they think. Like when they wanted us to provide the budgets for schools, cities, et cetera, right on that form. That was, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago or something. And that was hugely controversial, and it ended up going away in the end because it was too hard to manage. And so we'll see what happens with this one.
All right.
And that's all I have for you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate the information both on our budget and also on our volunteer fire departments.
And
Madam Chair, I have a comment to make. I appreciate you updating us a little bit, and I know we'll be getting updating even more. However, at our last board meeting, I did ask specifically that the committee of the whole would be talking about more details about the budget. And I know that it's important to hear from the Forest Service, it's important to hear from the highway, but I don't think they were time sensitive. So my request and consideration today is that our next board meeting, we specifically deal with the budget. Because then we don't have to call another meeting. And we're getting to the point where we're less than 2 months away from making a decision.
Mm.
Unless there's time-sensitive news that we need to know about, next board meeting should all be about the budget. As I look at this budget right now, as far as I'm concerned, it's all done. 683,000. I'm done. Nobody gets anything. We have to discuss all these parts. We just added $2,000 more for AMC. Now, I'm not sure if it's 25 or 26 budget, but they've raised, you know, the support of the AMC staff. And that was discussed at our district meeting. I think we're around 7.9 or something, so now we're 950. So that's a $2,000 raise that we need to consider. And I mean, it just keeps coming and
Right.
coming. So we need to sit down at a board meeting and start discussing this piece by piece. And one of the things I'm going to discuss at the Arrowhead County Association meeting tomorrow night is how many people are really doing the BWCAW appraisal. That's at 18.9. If nobody else is doing it, I think we take it off our list too. It's that kind of stuff. The details is in the devil here. So that I would ask respectively that our next board meeting
That
be.
is our priority,
Budget is the priority.
absolutely. Commissioner
And I'd just
Johnson.
like to say, I want complete, accurate information at that meeting. When we're talking about lists of things that to consider cuts, that we're considering all departments, all increases. Our original list wasn't comprehensive, and then I emailed James, and we did get a longer list. But still, not everything's on there. And some of these things that are on here are already over and done with. We voted on. So are we seriously going to consider firing somebody, saying we're not going to hold that position? We need to be transparent with the public of what is on that list that's already done, what is not done yet. And I wanted, there's things on that in the PHHS budget I haven't totally gone through. It's hard for me to understand some of the highway stuff as easily too. Line by items of what those increases mean. But there, and if you go through the PHHS budget, there are substantial increases in some line items. And I'm like, okay, that's an increase. How come you didn't get the list? Didn't make the list? Other departments got on there. Why are we picking and choosing what the public knows of what's in our 2025 budget? And I also want to point out our financial management plan that we were presented on September 24th is inaccurate or not complete. We need that information, and we need it to be accurate. If we are talking about a building project, and we need to see, we don't know how much we may need to borrow, but we need those tax rates to make sense to the public. And I'm just, so that you can look, okay, if we increase 2025 budget by this amount, what's it mean going down the road? Because you're going to have increases every year. And it's easy to, I do the spreadsheet, I can put it in there and change my percentages. But if we don't have accurate information to start with, it's really hard to guess where you're going to be in 5 years. So I want to make sure we have accurate information that we are presented with.
Other commissioners?
So what are the rates that the other counties at AMC were saying that they're, what were they doing on rates?
Everywhere from 3% up. Catholic is at 4.
So,
I know.
Cooch was really high.
They're gonna
Cooch
come
was,
down. I mean, we're gonna too, but they were like 25.
yeah, they're one of the higher ones. in the
And
state.
that was because of their jail.
Yeah,
so
they're,
Lucius 24, full Cass is 4%? How about Lake?
Do you have the, I don't have the paper with me.
Yeah, I do. Lake is 2.4.
Okay, and then St. Louis, and Carlton, and Pine, and Aiken, those are,
St. Louis. Oh, you know what? I didn't write. Oh, 7.23.
Pine and
3%, Carlton 3%, Aiken 4%.
Wow. Very impressive.
And we had said we get to 5,
Yep.
going towards 5.
Yep.
Mhm.
Well, maybe we ought to consider going to 4 or 3. And I just.
I heard 0.
Yeah.
Well, has it ever worked for each department to say, we're only going to increase by 4%, so you have your budgets, get it back to us with only a 4% increase for the next fiscal year?
Well, oftentimes the conversation, like that's arbitrary, right? How'd you pick 4%?
That was our,
Right.
but the
So-
point is, if we say,
Well, here's where we start. We want to provide these services. What does it cost? You know, versus we got 4% and that's it. What services can we provide? So it's like, where are you,
maybe we can't afford everything that's offered out there.
right, that's what I was gonna say, is where are we drawing the lines? Do we want to decrease services or decrease costs? Because maintaining services has an increased cost. Increasing services, increased costs. And so that's always the conversation. It's just, what framing are you using to determine your base, right? Do we have too many services? Which services do we want to cut? That's kind of that's the question. If we're truly wanting to, and I think as far as this list was concerned, these are new requests, right? That's what that list was.
Right.
New, not like PHHS increase in this budget, out-of-home placement budget because we've had that program going and we see a growth in it or whatever, you know. I don't
Oh,
know
no,
if
that's
it.
not what I'm talking about. There are other line items.
New
that-
requests?
I don't know.
Wow.
It jumped substantially. Why? Why
Well,
did that jump?
But that's what I'm saying, that's why
Yeah,
it wasn't
that's-
on that list, is that list is the new request.
But I consider that a new, I get if you go up by a certain percentage because of cost of materials, whatever. I get, but when it jumps a bigger percentage, it makes me think you're adding something. And I'm afraid we pick and choose which departments we want to,
Scrutinize?
yeah.
I think it was just, that's just the new request list, and I think it's 100% on mark to say why, not what are you adding? You know,
But
like that's-
I think we should be asking, are you adding
or just, you
something?
need to say why, because that's very open versus what are you adding is an assumption that there's something added versus just like, well, this is why, you know. It's just the framing, right?
Okay.
And I think it's important to keep that broad framing so that the targeting can be accurate, right? What are we targeting? Are we targeting services, reduction in services, or are we targeting new services? And so I think when we have these harder discussions, that's kind of, you gotta have that baseline and growth and not and trimming here or there, you know. I agree though, if there's a huge increase in a cost, why? You know,
Well, and
why
that's,
not?
I don't have that opportunity. I thought that was what this meeting, we were gonna have a committee of the whole, just to talk budgets, just to get these, say, I could ask that question and say, what about this line item? What does that include? But I'm feeling like I'm
You
not
should.
getting that opportunity as a group for us to learn together.
Well, talking about it
And-
right now is important, we should send the question out.
Absolutely.
That increase
Well,
is
that's
specific.
what, and why I gave my thing here. I want
Let's
these
do it.
things.
Let's do it.
Mhm.
I mean,
Well,
that's,
I have another meeting, and maybe some of you too, I'm not going to stay to hash this
Oh,
out
sure.
now. Board meeting, that's for
Or
sure.
committee of the whole, where we
No.
can,
Committee of the whole and is not working, because other people are scheduled. This should be then, if you're gonna say committee of the whole, only the budget, but we have a board meeting next week.
mhm.
Let's get started there. And if you need to trim anything or talk about, but to me, the committee of the whole is for information. That's what we get. But now we're at 10 minutes to 1. I don't think we should discuss the budget now.
Mhm.
And we have $600,000
Yeah.
potentially
Right.
to cut.
Yeah.
This is huge. This is not going to be an easy job.
Right.
And I don't want to put it off until December.
No.
And so we've got to give our administrator and our auditor some direction of which way do we want to go. And that takes the 5 of us sitting down together asking the questions.
And what's the,
And I would also say to help Brady and James, one of the things we can do is if you have specific questions, funnel them to me, we'll make a master list to share. Just to help for preparation.
Did you write down what I said out loud, or did you need me to email that to you?
I
I
think
didn't catch
I've,
the specific line. It was in PHHS.
I just know that there were certain lines that I would like to understand if there were new things added or increased. And then today, the discussion about the PHHS grants, that should be on our list. Do we
Mhm.
want to show that in 2025, or do we want it to show for 2024? We get to make that decision with the advice of our auditor. But that's what I'm saying. Can we count that to reducing the levy? I don't know. But we need to have these discussions. And I want to make sure we have a complete list of those things. And guess what? I'm just the lowly commissioner at $30,000 a year. I expect that the people that get paid the big bucks to make sure I have all the information and it's accurate.
I do not disagree, I'll stand up and clap for you. I mean, like, we need the information across the board. We don't know what every department head knows and all of the other what we're great knows, but, one other thing somewhere came through one ear lately. Do this is where you have to go. We do a lot of requirements, waiting for things from, not Red Hat, but who's the other one? Ehlers. Getting
Ehlers.
information from Ehlers.
Mhm.
Don't we have the software to do that ourselves?
Not exactly as they're doing it.
So do we have so I'd like to
I can-
discuss that at some point.
Yeah.
If our dependency and the amount we spend on them, which we have waited for information from them because they're really busy on more than one occasion. So is there something that maybe we could change in-house, or if we have the means, if we have the tools to do it ourselves, then is there value in doing it ourselves? So you have to go. You're right, I agree.
So we'll
We
do
have
it.
to talk about this, and if we talk about this, and maybe could we have one more meeting, another special meeting? We sit around and we put it out there saying another open meeting, we're talking about the budget, and you can see so many people really cared. They showed up today, but honestly, we have to have more time to really work things, to have a 5-person conversation. Well, we need Grady. We need the people that have the answers to be there and guide us
All
also.
right. Well, we have minutes of our standing committees that are listed, and with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much for a lengthy meeting.
Who's got bad water? Yeah, let me go down and,
I know the Lunkies have,
Yeah, I
yeah,
got that one.
yep, for
they have
sure.
bad water.
And probably
Stonegate
Lindsay.
Road, who's down there? They just,
Paul
Clarence
goes down?
Kemp. His, of course, he got